When I married Marcos, I believed we had everything we needed. In the first years, it felt like the world outside didn't exist. It was just the two of us, dreaming together of a perfect future. I was so sure he was my soulmate that nothing could ever tear us apart. But 3 years later, everything changed with a single sentence. He looked at me strangely and with a deep sigh, said, "I need some space." At that moment, I couldn't understand. What did he mean by that? What does needing space even mean? We had been through so much together. How could I believe that something so simple could shake what we had built? The truth is, at that moment, I had no idea the impact those words would have on my life. Would he come back? Or was it just an excuse for something bigger? I still didn't understand. The request Marcos made never left my mind. That afternoon, when he said he needed some space, my world stopped. I never imagined those words would come from his mouth. At first, I couldn't quite process it. I thought it was just a phase, something temporary. Maybe he was tired. Maybe something was going on at work. Or maybe it was just a request for space. It didn't seem like something definitive, something that would destroy everything we had built. But as the days went by and he distanced himself more, something started to change inside me. Doubt began to grow, and with it came a feeling of anguish I didn't know how to deal with. I, who always thought we were strong, that we could face anything together, now found myself alone, uncertain about everything. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. He wasn't saying "I love you" like before. He wasn't asking about my day. He didn't care to listen like he used to. Life, which once seemed like a fairy tale, was turning into a silent, growing nightmare. At first, I tried to ignore the signs. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase. After all, every couple goes through tough times, right? Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe it was just my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. What hurt the most was the feeling that more and more, he was pulling away from me. He started going out more, coming home later, and losing patience. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't understand how everything happened so quickly. I was losing Marcos and didn't know how to stop it. Every night he came home later, a new worry consumed me. When he finally looked at me, it was as if I were a stranger. He no longer seemed interested in what I had to say, in my ideas, in my feelings. Our house, which once felt like a place of comfort, now felt cold and empty. All I wanted was to talk, to know what was going on, but every time I tried, he'd look away or say he was tired. What happened to the man who promised to be by my side forever? What happened to the man who made me feel loved every day? The answers were always vague, but I began to realize he was pulling away in a way I didn't know how to handle. I became obsessed with the little changes. I watched the way he looked at his phone, the time he spent in the bathroom, the vacant looks he gave me when he was home. He was home, but not really here. There was an invisible wall between us, a distance I couldn't understand. I knew he was hiding something he didn't want to share with me, but it consumed me. I wanted to know what was happening, what had changed, but he gave me no clues. Silence became our biggest enemy. I even searched for answers in his things, but found nothing but empty promises and things that didn't make sense. I felt increasingly insecure, as if I were losing trust in myself. How could I not have seen it before? How could I not have noticed the signs that something was wrong? But at the same time, I clung to the hope that it was all just a misunderstanding. I couldn't believe that Marcos, the man I married, the person I believed to be my safe haven, was pulling away from me in such a cruel, silent way. And when he told me, for the 1000th time, that he needed some space, I no longer knew what to think. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But more than that, I wanted him to look at me the way he did before. I wanted him to hold me and tell me everything would be okay, that we could get through this. But he didn't do that. He pulled away even more. And what scared me the most was that I didn't know what to do. How do you recover what you didn't even realize you were losing? I wanted to understand, but it seemed like he had already made the decision to go on alone. The pain of uncertainty became greater than anything I had ever felt. I was trapped in a cycle of doubt, in an emptiness no one else could fill. Time kept passing, and every day, the feeling that everything was crumbling became stronger. The question that never left my mind was, will he come back? But deep down, I already knew the answer would be an overwhelming silence. The moment Marcos said he needed space, I never expected it to be the beginning of everything unraveling. I kept waiting, hoping that maybe he just needed a little time to clear his head. But each passing day only made it harder to believe in that possibility. The silence between us grew louder. I remember the night he came home later than usual, his face unreadable. I had spent the whole evening going over every conversation we'd had, every moment that now felt like a warning I didn't recognize until it was too late. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding as he finally walked through the door. He didn't look at me the way he used to. It wasn't the warm smile, the comforting eyes that had once made me feel safe. He looked exhausted, like he had been carrying something heavy for far too long. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just about needing time. It was something much deeper, something I was afraid to face. "We need to talk," he said. My throat tightened. I could barely speak, but I managed to force out, "What's going on, Marcos? Why are you doing this?" His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I've been thinking about us, about everything, and I don't think we're on the same page anymore." My heart stopped. It felt like the floor beneath me was collapsing, but I couldn't make myself move. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. "What do you mean?" I asked, the words barely leaving my lips. He looked at me, his gaze avoiding mine, like he couldn't bear to see the pain in my eyes. "I don't know if I'm happy anymore, Anna. I don't know if I'm the man you think I am." His words hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, cutting through the air between us. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to process what he was saying. My mind raced, trying to piece together the person I had spent the last 3 years with, trying to understand how we had ended up here. How did we go from building a future together to him questioning everything? My mind flooded with questions. Was this about me? Was I not enough for him? Or was it something about himself? Something I couldn't fix. The room felt like it was spinning, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. "I need space, Anna. I need to figure this out on my own," he continued. The words felt like they were being said through a fog, distant and disconnected. I felt my stomach twist, my whole body trembling, but I couldn't make him understand how much this was hurting me. "You can't just leave. You can't just shut me out like this," I pleaded, my voice barely above a whisper. But he wasn't listening. He was already retreating into himself, pulling away even more. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly, but the words felt hollow. "But I think this is what I need right now. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine." I wanted to scream, to tell him everything that was in my heart, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching as he turned away from me, retreating into his own world. And in that moment, I realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I married, was slipping away from me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. And what terrified me the most was that maybe there was nothing I could do. The next few days were a blur. I spent them waiting for him to come back to me. But each time he walked through that door, he was a little more distant. He was still here, physically, but he wasn't really with me anymore. I began to question everything. What was I missing? What had changed so drastically? What had I failed to see? I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, something he wasn't telling me. But he wouldn't open up, and every attempt I made to talk to him felt like I was chasing shadows. I had no idea where we stood anymore. What had once felt like a partnership, a connection, was now a broken thread, hanging by the slimmest of edges. And in the quiet, I realized something. I was holding on to a version of him that no longer existed, and I didn't know how to let go. Every word he spoke felt like it was leading us further apart, but I couldn't bring myself to face the reality that maybe it was already too late. The man I thought I knew was gone, and I was left standing in the wreckage trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. I wanted to believe that he would come back to me, that this was just a phase, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. He had already made his decision, and the weight of it crushed me piece by piece. In the silence that followed, I was left with one undeniable truth. I was losing him, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself waiting for something. I didn't even know what I was waiting for anymore. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was a final moment of clarity from Marcos that would explain everything. But with each passing day, I felt the weight of his absence growing heavier. I tried to keep myself busy, diving into work, talking to friends, doing anything I could to distract myself from the gnawing emptiness inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing filled the space he had left. And that was when I realized I was holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I was still waiting for him to come back, but the more I waited, the more I started to see things differently. I began questioning everything. Did he ever really love me the way I thought he did? Were the promises we made just words? I couldn't help but wonder if I had been so caught up in the idea of us, the perfect couple, that I ignored all the little signs, all the little cracks that had been there all along. And maybe he had been too afraid to face those cracks. Maybe he had already known this wasn't working long before he said the words. But it didn't matter now. The distance was already too great, and no amount of waiting could close the gap between us. I remember one night, lying in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, wondering where he had gone both physically and emotionally. I could hear the faint sounds of the city outside, but inside, it was eerily quiet. The silence was suffocating, and in that silence, I could hear my own heart breaking. I thought back to all the moments we had shared, the laughter, the quiet evenings spent in each other's company, the way his touch used to feel like home. It all felt like a distant memory now, a story I couldn't quite remember, but one that hurt to even think about. I had given him everything I had, my heart, my trust, my time. I had built my world around him, believing that our love was something that could withstand anything. But now, I was faced with the cruel reality that maybe love alone wasn't enough. Maybe love wasn't enough to fix something that had been broken for a long time. I kept telling myself that he would come around. He would realize what we had. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I even knew what we had anymore. I wasn't sure I recognized the person he had become or the person I had become in this relationship. I had lost so much of myself while trying to hold on to him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest part of all, letting go of someone I loved, someone I thought I knew, and finding the strength to rebuild myself in the aftermath. So here I am, sharing this with you, even though I never thought I'd be in a position to do so. I never imagined that I'd be telling my story to strangers, pouring out my pain in a way that feels both liberating and terrifying. But sometimes, you have to share your story, even when it hurts, because maybe it can help someone else who's going through something similar. If you're still here, listening to this, I hope you know that you're not alone. Life is messy, and sometimes, we can't fix everything, but we can keep moving forward, step by step. And maybe, just maybe, if you resonate with what I'm saying, you'll consider subscribing to this channel. I've come to realize that there's healing in sharing these stories, in connecting with others who understand. If my story touched you in any way, please share it, comment, or even just leave a like. It means more than you know. And who knows, maybe, just like me, you'll find a little bit of hope in knowing that you're not walking this path alone. Days blurred into one another, and with each passing moment, I felt the weight of the silence between us grow heavier. There was no anger, no shouting, just an overwhelming stillness that left me questioning everything. I had never realized how suffocating silence could be until I found myself wrapped in it. When he was home, it was as if we were two strangers occupying the same space. His presence was there, but his mind, his heart, those had already walked out the door. The man I thought I knew, the man I married, had slowly slipped away, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a relationship that no longer felt like mine. I kept asking myself where it all went wrong. What did I miss? Why didn't I see the signs sooner? I had given so much of myself to him, to us, and yet it felt like none of it mattered. He became distant in a way that I couldn't understand. It wasn't just that he stopped saying I love you or that he stopped asking about my day. It was the way he seemed to withdraw from everything that had once meant something to us. I thought of all the nights we'd spent together, talking, laughing, and dreaming about our future. I thought of how he used to hold me close, as though nothing could ever tear us apart. But now, all of that felt like a distant dream, something I could barely reach. I couldn't recognize the person he had become. I wanted to talk to him, to understand what was happening, but every time I tried, it felt like he was closing himself off even more. His responses were short, and his eyes never met mine the way they used to. It was as though I was talking to a ghost of the man I loved. I could feel the walls between us growing higher, thicker, until there was no way to get through to him. What was I holding on to? The memories of who we were, or the hope of something that was already gone? Every time he walked through the door and didn't look at me, every time he avoided my gaze, I could feel the distance between us becoming more permanent. And the hardest part of all was the realization that he had made his decision. He had already moved on, even if his body was still here. I wasn't just losing him emotionally, but I was losing the version of him that I had built my life around. I was no longer the woman he wanted to come home to. He no longer saw me the way he once did. The more I tried to hold on, the more he slipped through my fingers, and I could feel it slowly. Painfully, he was becoming a stranger. A stranger I didn't know how to reach anymore. There were days when I thought maybe he would come back to me, that maybe this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew that whatever had caused this rift between us was something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed by words or promises. It had to come from within him, and I had no control over that. It hurt. It hurt more than I had ever imagined it would. But the truth was, I couldn't make him love me again. I couldn't make him stay. And every time I tried, I was just reminding myself of how far gone he truly was. The silence between us was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an absence of connection, an absence of everything that we had once shared. And no matter how much I reached out, no matter how many nights I spent wondering what had happened to us, the silence remained. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was nothing left for me to do. I had to let go. I had to stop waiting for something that wasn't coming back. And that thought was the hardest of all. The thought that no matter how much love I had given, no matter how much I had hoped, this was the end of something I had believed in so deeply. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the end of the life I had imagined with him. And that was the hardest thing I would ever have to accept. It was a few days after that final, empty night when he came to me with something I wasn't expecting. For weeks, I had been clinging to hope, to the possibility that things could be fixed, that there was still a chance for us. But deep down, I knew that I had been lying to myself. The truth was already there, hiding in the silence between us. But I couldn't bring myself to face it. That afternoon, he finally sat me down, his face solemn, his eyes avoiding mine. I could feel the tension building in the room, and in that moment, I knew what was coming. The walls between us were too high, too thick to ignore. He wasn't coming back. Anna, he began, his voice trembling slightly. There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while now. Something I should have said a long time ago. The words hung in the air, and I felt a sudden lump form in my throat. My heart was racing, and I couldn't breathe. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't prepared for what he said next. I've been seeing someone else. The words crashed into me like a wave, drowning me in an ocean of disbelief and pain. For a moment, I couldn't process it. I just stared at him, feeling like I was falling into a deep abyss. He was seeing someone else? How long had this been going on? How could I not have known? I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. My chest tightened, and I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I never meant to hurt you, he continued, his voice soft, almost apologetic. But I've been unhappy for a long time, and I think I was just too afraid to admit it. It felt like everything inside me was shattering. The world I had known, the life I had built, was crumbling before my eyes. I had given him everything, my heart, my soul, my trust, and yet it wasn't enough. He had already moved on, while I was still stuck in the past, holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but all I could do was sit there, numb in disbelief. He had been so careful, so distant, that I hadn't even suspected. All the signs had been there, but I had been too afraid to see them. I had been holding on to a love that wasn't real anymore, and the reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. I'm sorry, he said again, his eyes finally meeting mine. But this is the end. I need to move on with my life, and I think you do too. His words were like a dagger to my heart, but I could no longer deny what I had known all along. He had already made his decision. I wasn't the one he wanted anymore. He wasn't the man I had married, and I realized in that moment that there was nothing I could do to change it. The pain of acceptance was unbearable, but it was also a relief. I had spent so much time trying to fix something that was already broken, trying to bring back a love that had faded long ago. And now, with the truth in front of me, I could finally let go. I had to. There was no other choice. As he left that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. but also a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was chasing something that wasn't there. It hurt. God, it hurt more than anything I had ever felt. But as the days passed, I realized that maybe this pain was what I needed to heal. I had been holding on to someone who had already let me go, and now it was time to let go of him too. I couldn't keep holding on to a love that was gone. I had to start rebuilding myself, even if I didn't know how or where to begin. I had to start living for myself, even though the road ahead seemed terrifying and uncertain. But in that moment, I knew that I couldn't stay stuck in the past. I had to move forward. I had to let go of the man I thought I knew, the man I thought I would spend my life with, and find a way to heal, to move on, and to rediscover who I was without him. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I had a chance to find myself again, a chance to be whole, even without him. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to realize something profound. The pain didn't go away immediately. It wasn't as if one day I woke up and everything was fine again. No, the road to healing was long and filled with moments of doubt and tears. There were days when I felt like I had taken a step forward, only to find myself falling back into the same emotional trap. But slowly, very slowly, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. It felt like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. And yet, each day, I felt a little stronger. Each day, I found a new piece of myself that I had forgotten in the chaos of my relationship with Marcos. I started to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting or about pretending that the past didn't matter. It was about learning to live with it, to embrace it, to make peace with it. I had to let go of the man I thought I knew, the person I thought I would spend my life with. And in doing so, I began to rediscover who I was, who I had been before we met. I started to love myself again, something I hadn't done in so long. I remembered the parts of me that I had neglected, the dreams I had put on hold. Slowly, those dreams began to come back into focus. I realized that I was still capable of hope, of joy, of finding happiness, even if it wasn't with him. And while there were still days when the grief hit me like a wave, I learned to ride it. Instead of drowning in it, I learned to accept that the love I thought I had lost wasn't gone. It had just transformed into something different, into a lesson, a part of who I had become. I may have lost Marcos, but I hadn't lost myself. And that, in the end, was what mattered the most. As I look back on everything that has happened, I realize how important it is to tell these stories, to share the pain, the lessons, and the healing, because, just like me, there are so many others who need to hear that. They're not alone. There are voices that haven't been heard, stories that need to be shared, memories that need to be preserved. And so, I ask you to join me in keeping these stories alive. Subscribe to this channel, not just to hear my story, but to hear the stories of others who have walked similar paths. By subscribing, you become a part of something bigger, a community that believes in the power of sharing and understanding. If my story resonates with you, please leave a comment. Share your thoughts, your experiences. Let's preserve these memories together. Let's give voice to those who have suffered, and let's honor their strength by telling their stories. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, check out the playlist on this channel. The link will be in the description or the pinned comments. Together, we can continue this journey of healing and remembrance.